Hey, what are you looking at?
A community blighted by gangs of troublemaking drunken youths.
They would sit on your cars, they would swear at you, they would say they would do things to me sexually.
An ordinary man on an ordinary street on what began as an ordinary summer's evening.
I never imagined that to happen to anyone. You hear it on the news all the time and you see it in newspapers, but you never think it's going to happen to you.
A father beaten to death in front of his 3 young daughters. The murder of Garry Newlove outside his home in August 2007 was one of those crimes that shock people to the core, that provoke soul-searching and questions about what sort of nation we'd become. Tonight, his wife and daughters speak in detail for the first time about what happened that fateful night. For many, the brutal murder of Garry Newlove was simply a reflection of Britain's broken society. After months of escalating, drink-fuelled, antisocial behaviour in the area, a gang of drunken youths had taken the life of a devoted father. This is the story of a family's devastating loss and their remarkable response to it. Warrington lies in the northwest of England, between the cities of Manchester and Liverpool. With a population of around 200,000, it is much like any other town in Britain. Garry and Helen Newlove and their 3 daughters moved to this house on Station Road in the Fernhead area of the town in 2004. It was a place where residents took pride in their homes, somewhere people wanted to live.
What was the area like that you were living in?
It was the old-fashioned area. You know, it was just a normal residential area that you knew your neighbours. So it was really nice family feel about it.
I knew Fernhead fairly well. It's a nice area. It's the kind of area you might want to live. It's the kind of area you'd want to bring up children. Garry and Helen had a fairly nice house on what looked like a nice street, but it turned out that that area had had its problems before.
Well, really, the problems in Warrington weren't terribly different from lots of other places in Cheshire and indeed other parts of the country in terms of the problem of youngsters, young males, drinking too much and then indulging in antisocial behaviour and damage after they've been drinking.
There was an underpass barely 10 metres from the Newloves' front door, which had become a place where teenagers would gather to drink and mess about. 3 friends, Adam Swellings, Stephen Sawton and Jordan Cunliffe, would often be among them.
I think the vast majority was groups of youngsters gathering together, drinking alcohol, becoming drunk, and then on the way back they headed down Station Road, and that's when some of the problems arose for not just the Newlove family but other residents within that area.
They would sit on your cars, they would swear at you, they would say they would do things to me sexually, and, you know, to have to keep Garry from going out there because there was always that fear factor that, you know, you'd end up being in trouble, to be perfectly honest. It'd end up that you were in problems.
You couldn't really go down the street without seeing, like, a gang of kids. But they just didn't care. They'd hang around in shop corners, they'd just sit on people's cars, and they'd be everywhere. So you know they're up to no good, and they'd even vandalise something right in front of your eyes.
Was Garry himself worried? Did he say to you, look, we should move, or was he concerned about what might happen?
He was sick and tired of weekends, having to go to the front door, look out if your car was fine. Sick of coming out on a Saturday or Sunday when you're doing your gardens and having bags full of litter of cans of lager. There was a guy one day who was actually urinating up the fence, and Garry said, what do you think you're doing? I've got, 3 young daughters here and you just get verbal abuse. So yes, it come to a stage where we said, look, we really need to get away from here.
Fantastic, mate.
Local residents did complain to the police, sometimes leading to an increase in patrols, but they felt there was no sustained attempt made to tackle the problem.
Every Friday and Saturday night we didn't feel safe at all. There was always vandalising, making so much noise under the subway, vandalising cars, just throwing litter everywhere. They just didn't really care about where people lived, they just wanted to do their own thing, thinking it was okay.
Were people in the neighbourhood scared of them? Were you scared of them?
I wouldn't want to go out at night, you know, past 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. I wouldn't want to walk underneath the subway because, you know, they would try and torture you, you know, insult you, whatever, and I think that's how everybody felt in the neighbourhood. I think they were just a nuisance and they were in the way.
Gangs are an issue that affect many people, not just on rough council estates, but on every estate in this country. Kids that roam and cause problems, and people don't know what to do about it. On this estate, there was a real sense that people were helpless. They would call the police, perhaps about kids throwing stones through windows, and they'd be told, it's not an emergency.
Howard and Christine Malone live just a few doors down from the Newlove house. They have lived here for many years and had seen drunken behaviour becoming more and more of a problem.
It was quite common. You'd get groups going past. Sometimes there was no problem whatsoever. And other times it was just the opposite. You know, they were drunk and under the influence of drugs. And anything could happen.
When the low-level abuse escalated to a brick thrown through their window, the Malones took the dramatic step of getting CCTV cameras fitted to the front of their home.
As I say, it was horrific. At the end of the day, there could have been a fatality. The whole room was covered in glass. Christine was hysterical. The incidents that were going on in Station Road were continuous. You could say every 3 months that something was going to happen, and it did.
Was it building up? Were there more of these gangs around? Did you sense that it was getting worse?
Since the day that we moved in, it definitely, like, in general, there was more gangs walking through. It wasn't always them drinking at first, but then you did notice that it was then always the case. They always had alcohol on them.
My wife said for years, somebody will get murdered on Station Road before long. Because, as I say, it was a regular occurrence, and it was a matter of, not if it will happen, it was a matter of when it will happen.
The community was being victimised by a group of youths drinking and causing trouble week after week. Cars were vandalised, graffiti sprayed, residents shouted at, and on occasion assaulted. But no one could have imagined how far things would go.
I honestly didn't think it would happen in our area. I mean, I am very aware now that this kind of thing happens in every area, no matter if it's a bad or good area. You hear about it, knife crime all the time and things like that, and you just don't expect it to happen, do you?
But it was about to happen, and to a hard-working family man with 3 daughters, aged 12, 15 and 18.
He was very, very loving father, loved his children dearly, very hard-working.
So he was a real family man, was he?
Oh yeah, very, very much so. Very family unit. Definitely wasn't one that would go out with the lads or anything. He did it occasionally, but nothing. He preferred to be at home.
Life hadn't always been easy for the Newlove family. When he was 32, Garry was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and although the cancer had gone, it was a long battle back to health.
He lost 8.5 stone in a week when he first had it, and then learned to eat. He carried on working. He never, claimed or anything. He still wanted to provide for his family, and I truly admired him for that.
So give us an idea of what your dad was like.
Sum it up really by saying he was my best friend. I could tell him anything. Like, we were a really close family. We still are a close family. Told my mum and dad absolutely everything. Yeah, no, he was my best friend, and that's all I can say really. Just like, best guy ever.
Coming up, for the first time, in their own words, Garry's family talk in detail about what they saw that night.
I just couldn't believe that my dad was in that state that I saw. He was just full in blood and his head was just smashed up. I've never seen. I couldn't even think of how people could even do that to my dad. He's just unbelievable.
In the summer of 2007, the residents of this street were being plagued by gangs of drunken youths. But from incessant petty vandalism, the antisocial behaviour was about to escalate to murder. Here for the first time, the family of Garry Newlove relive in detail the events of that summer's night. A night that was to change their lives forever.
On the Friday, I'd actually been working and come home early because I wasn't feeling very well, 100%. And so Garry used to make really good chucky eggs, as we used to call them. And so he did me a chucky egg and some soldiers. And I decided to go up to bed because I didn't feel very well at all.
On the night of the attack, what were you doing?
I was working at IKEA and my boyfriend Tom picked me up. I came in and it was around 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Hey, Dad.
Hiya, do you have a good day at work?
I went into the living room and my dad was on his laptop and I asked him if there was any food left from tea, and they'd had like a Chinese takeaway. And I went into the kitchen to put some into the microwave to warm up for my tea and just sat there with Tom eating it. Just like a normal night after work, really.
I came home from school. I can't remember like the early day because it's mostly the night I remember. But I remember sitting in my bed and reading my book. Mum had been ill that night, so I just really kept to myself. So it was just an ordinary night, just thinking it was like last weekend. Nothing seemed different at all.
At around 10:30 p.m, the family were settled inside the house, a normal Friday night.
You'd heard noise, which was usual, but then we'd heard glass being smashed, which kind of then you kind of heckles go up and thinking, oh God, what have they done now? And then I heard a thud against my car, and that's when I thought there's something really going on that's not, they're attacking my car again. I'd already had a broken windscreen mirror, so I really didn't want to what they're doing again.
Garry, can you see what's happening?
And literally, as I'm shouting Garry downstairs, could you just go and check? My daughter Amy runs down with her dad as well, and he said, yeah, I'll go and check them. He ran out barefooted, just had shorts on. It was a summer's night.
We've done it again.
And never thought anything of it, to be perfectly honest.
I just thought, it's just another gang going past, it'll be nothing. So I just stayed in the kitchen.
Dad, just leave it.
I'm fed up.
I looked at him and he looked like annoyed, as you would be if someone had just damaged your property. And then I went out to go grab him, but he'd already started walking off. Dad, what are you doing? I had like a feeling in my stomach where where something's going to happen, but you just ignore it because it's like nothing really could happen now because there's no danger.
From the point where Amy went out, I thought something's going on, so I followed them out, as did Danielle.
Amy, what's happening? I don't know.
What's going on?
Dad! It just... Something didn't feel right. It wasn't the same as every other occasion. If my dad's gone outside to check on his car or whatever.
Oh, you lads.
Zoe and boyfriend Tom looked on as Garry approached the gang of youths.
Say like we got before I knock it off, yeah? Take your teeth out before I knock them out.
At that point, he must have been around where we stood now. Then obviously I come out the road as well. And from that point, obviously, we were just basically watching to see whether he'd come back.
Garry had gone to remonstrate with the gang. His approach was caught on the CCTV recently fitted at their neighbour's house. It shows the gang moments before they attacked.
The gang stopped and then started walking back towards my dad, and then they formed like a semicircle shape.
Come on, Dad, just leave it.
My dad didn't raise his voice once. He was relatively calm considering how many times it's happened. And then one guy hit my dad, and then they all started hitting my dad. So, yeah, kind of all happened so fast.
All of a sudden he was like surrounded, and then someone had come from the back to the back of him, and kneed him in the back because he had a sore back. He obviously fell down, and then that's when I started to run. And by the time I got there, and when I was running, they were all kicking him and everything.
Come on!
He got punched, got hit as well, and then he went down. And at that point he went down, obviously I actually ran up there, obviously followed by Amy and Danielle at that point as well, and Zoe.
They were like a pack of animals, kicked my dad from behind, my dad fell to the floor, and you think, my dad's on the floor now, they'll stop. You know, they've had the fun, but they carried on kicking my dad. And then at some point they must have thought, oh my God, you know, and then they started running. At that point, Danielle had come out and she was next to my dad on the road.
Ambulance, please. When I got outside, I saw my dad lay on the floor in a pool of blood, and his head was just smashed up. His eyes were all bulged up. He was just full of blood everywhere.
Just motionless, lying on the floor, very cold, obviously no features whatsoever to him, just really cold, blue in the face, and obviously blood as well. So,
yeah. Garry! Garry, come on, wake up, mate. Garry!
Amy had gone in to get my mum, and my only instinct was, my dad's going to be fine. He's fine. It's my dad, you know. He'll get through anything. He'd already got through cancer.
Mum, it's Dad. Amy's hysterical. And I'm trying to get there, and it's like a speed that's not a speed. And when I'd gone to come down the stairs, Amy had collapsed on the floor. As soon as I stepped out on the doorstep at the bottom of the drive, that's when really our world collapsed fully. Couldn't run to get to him at all because I've got plates in my leg. And the first person really I saw was Zoe, telling me not to come near. And as she says that, I look on the ground, and Gary's not moving. He's laying on the floor.
I just couldn't believe that my dad was in that state that I saw. He was just full in blood and his head was just smashed up. I've never seen. I couldn't even think of how people could even do that to my dad. He's just unbelievable. I don't think our person could even have to do that to someone. Anyway, the ambulance arrived in. At this time, the paramedics told me to move away and so they could carry on with my dad.
Once I'd got my head sorted, I was like, realised what had happened. So I immediately ran out and then found Mum crying on the curb, hysterically, and then the ambulance door was open, so I looked round it and my dad was just lying there, and then ambulance people were attending to him. And then I knew then that it was bad because the ambulance person shut the door on us.
I've never seen, even like on TV, like doing casualty, I've never seen how much paramedics were working on my dad that night. They were doing absolutely everything, and it got that bad that they had to shut the door on me and won't let me carry on seeing my dad, the work they were doing, and that's when my dad went to hospital.
Garry was taken in the ambulance. You eventually got there by car. Tell me what happened when you arrived at the hospital.
You're called into a waiting room and all you can think of is casualty. Mad as it is, I'm saying, you're not taking me there, I know what you're doing there, you do it on casualty. And they said, no, we need you to come in and have a drink. You then see the consultant who comes in, and then he was the one who told me that Garry had arrested in the ambulance, and he said no, he's just not come back, he's in a coma, but we've made him comfortable, but we really need to get him for a scan on his head straight away, but he's in such a bad way that it's touch and go to get him to the scan machine. They gave me his jewellery, which I said put his jewellery back on, you know, and I wanted to see him, so they said they would let me see him when they could. To see him from his toes to his shoulder, he looked fine, apart from a graze. But to see him from his head, it was horrendous, really.
Garry made it through the night, and the following day, Amy decided to write a letter to her dad.
I just sat on my desk and wrote it, but I don't know, it just spilled everything out of me. And because I didn't know how, because really it was my goodbye letter, in case, I didn't get to say goodbye. So I just was going on about how I love him, and boy, it was so hard because I didn't think I'd have to say goodbye at my age. To Dad, I am unable to see you right now as you are too ill, but I know you can fight this as you are a strong, loving man who I know loves me no matter what. I will stick by you while you're in hospital and I will take care of Mum. I can't get across to you how much I will miss you, and I don't know what I would do without you. You've always been there for me when I am down, and you always put a smile on my face, even if it is a rubbish joke. I want you to know you are the best dad anyone could ask for. I love you so much, and I do hope you can fight this. I love you from your darling daughter, who loves you so, so much, and from the whole family, we love you and don't give in.
And then what happened after that? You had to wait for those terrible hours, I suppose.
I just wanted him to wake up. I nagged him, actually. I said, you fought cancer, you fool. Just wake up, pull yourself together, don't be beaten by this. And we just waited through the night.
As it became clear their father wasn't going to make it, each of the girls reacted in their own way.
Up until that point, I hadn't really cried, and because Danielle and Amy, they were upset all the time. My mum was really weepy, and everyone was in a state of shock, and I just didn't know how to act. And the second I saw my dad in the hospital bed, I just broke down crying, and I couldn't. Amy and Danielle were there chatting away and holding his hand and giving him hugs and kisses, and I couldn't even stand near the bed. I had to go back out the room, calm myself down, and I broke down every time I went back into the room to try and say goodbye. I just couldn't. So in the end, I never really said anything. I said goodbye, but I didn't. Amy read a letter out, and Danielle was talking to me. I couldn't say anything.
And you were holding him as he died?
Yes, I lay on him. And the nurse, fantastic staff that they had there, was just I just remember him saying, "Are you ready?" And they turned the machine off, and he stopped breathing, and I just screamed and screamed and screamed. They had to tear me off Garry, and I physically could not take any more.
So this is a man who survived cancer and then lost his life through a mindless act of violence.
Yes.
And you watched him go?
Yes, I did. I watched him go. I saw his injuries. And then had to go back and do the hardest thing again. Is to go back and tell your children that the dad's not going to walk through the door again.
Garry Newlove died from his injuries 2 days after being attacked. He was 47. Coming up, while a family grieved, the death of Garry Newlove was to spark a national outcry.
It was just such a sad, cowardly, vicious attack on a man who was doing the right thing, going out challenging antisocial behaviour.
The death of a father murdered for challenging Yobs for their antisocial behaviour horrified the country. In life, he had been an unassuming family man. In death, a symbol of a broken society.
Killed in the street, the father who fought back against the thugs. Tonight, police continue to question 6 teenagers over his death.
I think people looked at what happened to Garry and they thought that could have been them. This was a dad of 3, a respectable dad of 3, who'd only gone outside to remonstrate with some children, some teenagers. It hit home because people realised it could have been them.
I was shocked. I was very sad, and this was an area that was very dear to me. I'd served as a local beat officer, served there in CID. I couldn't quite believe this had happened within the policing area that we had. It was just such a sad, cowardly, vicious attack on a man who was doing the right thing, going out challenging antisocial behaviour.
The family obviously were absolutely devastated, you know, so much so that you would probably describe it as almost hysterical. Those first few days were very, very dark, I think, for Helen and the girls, and I think they only coped because, you know, they have got such a close family.
The next morning I went to see Helen and the family at the home address. It was difficult. I can still picture, I've never seen so much devastation within a room. There was upset, there was distress. The children were obviously very upset. And I spoke to Helen, and I can remember the first reaction as a human being was to say sorry.
It was an ordinary street, it was an ordinary family, but it was also about an ordinary guy who'd gone out trying to protect his family in a way to remonstrate with local youths, and the sort of dilemma that lots of people face when they hear about things or see young people misbehaving or involved in crime, what to do, whether to actually intervene.
The police were quick to make breakthroughs.
The police were immediately called to the scene, and the youths ran off from the Station Road area up to the shops at Fernhead, Insall Road shops. And there's a PCSO on duty there who stop-checked two youths, a lad called Stephen Sorton and a lad called Jordan Cunliffe. He spoke to them and he noticed that one of the youths was only wearing one shoe, and he told him that he'd left a shoe behind in Valiant Park. The other youth wasn't wearing any shoes. When further up, police officers attended the scene, then we found a shoe that was lying by the side of Garry Newlove's body, which immediately drew our interest to these two youths. And subsequently, intelligence checks were made, and we visited their address, and they were in the address, and they were subsequently arrested and taken to the police station.
A third suspect was 19-year-old Adam Swellings. He was already well known to police and had several convictions for violent assaults and antisocial behaviour.
We knew the following day that Swellings had been with them, and at that particular time we didn't know where he was. We tracked him down and arrested him on the Monday evening. He was at Crewe at the time, and was brought to the custody suite late on Monday afternoon.
Had you been drinking that day? Did you cause any damage to any of the cars on the station road?
Obviously, at the early stage of the investigation, I established that these guys were going to probably put forward that they weren't of a violent disposition. So it was important for us to identify that they were and to be able to paint an accurate picture of their behaviour, not only on that particular evening, but over the weeks leading up to the assault. And there was a consistent pattern of these youths being involved in consuming large amounts of high-volume alcohol, such as cider, and then engaging with any person who they met within the community who dared to speak to them or anyone who dared to disrespect them, I think is the word that they used. I think one of the words used was he was disrespectful.
Yeah. Although police seemed to have detained the suspects quickly, there were criticisms that the force had not responded firmly enough to earlier complaints from residents. During the months before the attack, locals had become more and more concerned about the behaviour of these gangs.
There was some criticism of Cheshire Police at the time, and rightly so. These boys had been in the area many times before, and neighbours had complained about them, and they'd called the police, and they felt that very little was being done. Now, the police, to be fair, did have their hands tied to a degree, and this was a problem across the country. But that didn't change the fact that Garry Newlove had died at the hands of some yobs that the police had been aware of in the past.
In fact, Adam Swellings had only been released from jail on the morning of the attack after pleading guilty to a violent assault on another man. He'd been bailed by magistrates against police advice, with the condition that he stayed out of Warrington. Stephen Sorton, 17, had a previous reprimand for assault, and Jordan Cunliffe, 16, was known to police for shoplifting. But while the police interviewed suspects and built up a better idea of what had happened that night, a family was grieving.
So Helen, how as a family did you get through those first few days after the attack?
It was a bit of a whirl. I didn't sleep. My sister was really concerned because I wasn't sleeping. And the local GP came out and gave me some tablets, which I didn't really want to take. I slept with Gary's T-shirt. I just kept smelling his pillow. And we just kind of functioned in a robotic way, really, the girls and I. You feel you're going to wake up, you know, or this is just a bad dream.
Garry was laid to rest on September the 3rd, 2007, 3 weeks after his death. It was a traumatic moment for the whole family. Adam Swellings finally admitted to police that he had struck Garry, and forensic evidence was building to place Stephen Sorton at the scene.
We then were able to identify that it was a telephone call from Swellings through to the rest of his colleagues, if you like, to say he was out of prison and they were going to join up. They then, round about 3 p.m, we had them on CCTV buying alcoholic drinks. They were then playing football in a local park when they were approached by a police community sports officer who confiscated some drink off some of the youths. And then round about 7 p.m. onwards, we had a number of incidents that they were involved in where attacks took place, or threats to attacks took place on other individuals and youths in the area, which culminated round about 10:30 with them being in Station Road, and obviously the incident with Mr. Newlove's car before the attack on him.
That night, the gang had been drinking cheap alcohol bought from local off-licences, something that resonated with the general public as it came at a time when fear over Britain's booze culture and associated antisocial behaviour was at its height.
Alcohol played a huge role in what happened to Garry. These boys had been drinking very heavily that night, and this is something that resonated heavily with the public. How could this be allowed to happen? How could these boys have access to alcohol? How could they be allowed to roam the streets looking for trouble while drunk and drinking? It was an issue that the then Chief Constable, Peter Fahey, was aware of.
So you would like to see the drinking age raised to 21?
Yes, absolutely. And it is this issue also about drinking in public. It was certainly based on not just the Garry Newlove case, but the fact that it was such a huge issue for us right across Cheshire. And it was that feeling that something needed to be done. And, you know, the particular danger that young people were causing, those that had been drinking that much, but also the fact that they made themselves very, very vulnerable, either as victims of crime or as perpetrators of crime.
On the 13th of November, just 3 months after Garry's death, the trial began. 5 youths were up on murder charges, including Adam Swellings, 19, Stephen Sorton, 17, and Jordan Cunliffe, aged 16.
They started hitting my dad and...
After several police interviews and identity parades came the trauma of a trial. The Newlove girls and Helen were all to be key witnesses for the prosecution. Amy and Danielle, being the youngest, gave their evidence by video link.
I had to sit with my hands underneath my lap, and if I cried, I have to put my head down. And it was just so confusing because the questions were so highly worded because I was only 12 and I didn't really understand what they were saying. And I'm not the cleverest of people, but they fired questions after questions and it just confused me. And I was saying no when I was meant to say yes, and I was so uncomfortable and it put me under so much pressure.
I didn't know what it was going to be like, I didn't know what to expect. And to be cross-examined by 5 different people and you feel like you're the one in the wrong. That's how I felt. When I got there, I thought I'd done something wrong, and, you know, if I say something that, you know, isn't spot on, if I've got, like, a description of one of the guys wrong, you know, I'm going to ruin everything and they're not going to, you know, they're not going to be put away. I felt like I could, in one word, let someone down, and then that would be on my conscience. And I already felt guilty for, you know, not saving my dad, and I still do, and I know I can't have done anything.
What was it like seeing those youths in court?
They were just normal, everyday youths you see on the street. But basically, the distance between where I sat and they sat is literally the distance that me and you are at the moment. And to actually see them look around smiling, it's unbelievable. You just think, how can you do that?
Is that what they were doing?
Yeah, they laughed, they were smiling. It made me feel physically sick, to be honest. And we are told we can't show any emotion whatsoever. So it was a hard 10 weeks to follow.
They showed no remorse during the court process. I think at times difficulty was, I think they treated it more as a bit of a joke, in fairness, within the trial process. Not taking it seriously, at times they were sniggering, and I think occasions they were dropping off to sleep as evidence was being given.
He went out to see what was happening.
I think it was very difficult. I think when they gave their evidence, particularly the children, it was heart-rending to be sat in that court building to hear some of the evidence. And I think from a policing perspective, when you hear the evidence, you always think the benefit of hindsight is the more we could have done on that night or previous.
After 10 long, painful weeks for Helen and the girls, the jury were sent out to consider the evidence. But it would be 10 agonising days before they returned their verdict.
You have been found guilty
of the 5 charged, 3 teenagers were found guilty of Garry's murder. The other 2 were acquitted. Cunliffe, Swellings and Saughton were sentenced to life with minimum terms of 12, 17 and 15 years respectively. Saughton's tariff was later reduced to 13 years on appeal.
Guilty of murder. 3 teenagers who attacked Garry Newlove outside his home in Cheshire have been convicted of murder.
There must have been relief that the people who did this were going to prison for quite a long time.
There was relief. We got 3 guilty verdicts. But murder is mandatory life sentence. So you hear that and you want life for life. Not as a revenge, as justice that we should have in place in this country.
They've taken my dad's life and they've taken away what my life would have been. They've taken away what my mum's life would have been, my sisters, my dad's brother, everyone in our family and everyone around us. We've had to change the way we are because they thought it was a bit of fun kicking someone and causing them to die.
And what is it like for you personally and for your daughters, you as a family, to live with the loss that you've suffered?
We have good days, we have bad days. I just now think on the Friday I woke up a wife. On the Friday night I went to bed as a widow. And you don't ever think that is going to happen to you. I just want my daughters to be how Garry would have wanted them to be Zoe, to be Amy, to be Danielle, and to get through each pinnacle moment, on their 18th, the 21st, when they get married, that I can stay there and actually think that Garry will be proud of what I'm doing.
Next, a family's brave struggle to come to terms with their enormous loss.
It's not about Garry being a murder victim. It's about doing something good out of something horrendous. It keeps Garry alive in a sense, but it actually raises awareness.
The light has gone out of our lives. It's like a piece of our jigsaw has been lost forever. Amy suffers terrible flashbacks of that night, as Zoe and Danielle also do. As regards myself, I am completely broken-hearted.
The murder of Garry Newlove provoked public debate and outrage about antisocial behaviour.
If we all get together and we stand together, it's more impactful and we may get something done.
In the weeks, months and years that have followed the brutal murder, Helen and the girls have become more and more determined for some good to come from Garry's death.
There is no quick fix to Britain's problems. We need a real strategy.
It's not about Garry being a murder victim. It's about doing something good out of something horrendous. It keeps Garry alive in a sense, but it actually raises awareness and it makes everybody sit up again and say, because complacency doesn't sit with me at all, and that's what you can become.
Today, Helen is in London for a series of meetings.
Morning.
Good morning.
They are aimed at discussing how the drinks industry can help to combat binge drinking.
Yeah, they're going to be the community pubs, which I'm really, that's the most important one, to get into local hubs. So that, because the mechanism that we have in place there, that's where the antisocial behaviour is.
Helen is fighting on a number of fronts to tackle antisocial behaviour associated with drinking, to strive for better victim support, to force better parental responsibility. Her work has triggered national debate. Her hope, that another family will not have to bear the anguish hers has suffered.
What do you make of what your mother's trying to do and trying to change things?
It's horrible that it's got to be my mum that's got to make people sit up and listen. And it's only just now that I'm realising how powerful our story is, and, you know, it's going to help other families. And what my mum's doing is amazing, and it's so nice to know that the people out there, you know, are taking notice of what my mum's trying to achieve, because things do have to change.
I think a lot of people relate to Helen. She's, you know, she's such a lovely lady. I think everybody will look at her and think, well, you know, if that had happened to my husband, I don't blame you. And I think they do listen to her, and the girls.
I'll be introducing you to Stuart. He's helping us with the Life Lab project, the 3D side of it.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hi, Stuart, you okay?
Yes, good. So we're going to show you...
One of the projects dearest to Helen's heart, which daughter Zoe is also involved in, is to bring much more accessible education about the dangers of drinking into schools.
Augmented reality allows us to show a three-dimensional object on screen, and for the...
Look at that!
She's visiting a lab which is developing 3D technology to bring into schools.
Incredible.
I think because I have no hidden agenda. My agenda is I've lost somebody to murder, a violent murder, with the youth, with alcohol, and I am speaking from the heart. I'm not really speaking from a book. Not being, you know, brainwashed into anything, you know, whatever. It's basically, I'm a normal woman who woke up one morning as a wife and then went to bed as a widow.
Hiya.
Improvements have been made in alcohol-related crime in Warrington.
Give me them here. What's your name? How old are you?
And the residents of Station Road are no longer blighted by drunken gangs.
You're under 18, so I'm now going to take them off you. I'm going to take your details, mate. Have you ever been in trouble with the police before?
But it remains a weekly battle for police right across the country to deal with groups of teens drinking.
Let me tell you, you might end up finding yourself in alcohol counselling, mate, if you carry on. Yeah, there's a bin fire at this location as well, if you let County Fire know, because there's a few yous about.
I'm not a party pooper. I enjoy a drink like anybody else. But the fact is that we need now to be careful in what we're doing. It's such a state and it's so accessible. So by being involved in the education, working with the alcohol industry themselves, which is the biggest factor of it all, it just ticks where I want to be and keep fighting for change, really.
It's incredibly important that people like her campaign for change, because she's had an experience that very, very few people have had, and therefore there's an authenticity when she speaks that very few people can match, because of the experience that she's been through and the credibility that she has and her family has. I think she's an absolutely remarkable woman.
Since the murder, Helen and the girls have moved away from the area, and despite the focus provided by campaigning, coming to terms with the terrible loss they've suffered continues to be a painful journey.
It's always going to be a piece of puzzle missing, and we're lucky that we have a close family, and obviously obviously Amy is like my dad, so it's still like having my dad there, but Amy, my sister, life's completely different when my dad's not here, but as we're a strong family, we get through it day by day.
I can't put into words how angry I am about it, because it's completely changed. Like, for every single day I wake up and think, what would I be doing now? And I just constantly question what if, and you can't help but feel angry. And to see the way my little sister's changed, Amy, she completely was not herself. She's only just now being the Amy that we once knew. And to think what she would have been like if my dad was still here, and you know, she's had to grow up so much. She was 12 at the time, and I get really upset when I talk about Amy.
Because I spent most of my time with my dad, like gardening and washing car, it's lonely now. I mean, not lonely fully, because I obviously have my mum, my sisters and my other relatives, but because Dad was a big part of me, and basically, not a dad obviously, but a big brother and like a best friend. And now it seems part of me's gone too. But Zoe and Danielle like Dad in different ways. So, sorry. So he's not gone fully because, as Danielle said, I'm like him in ways, and it makes me laugh when I do things that he would probably do. But it's just that quality time that I miss.
I truly believe that you just don't know what's round the corner. But it's a case of that I can never bring Garry back. You don't need anything to remind you of the person. It's inside every day, every second. At the end of the day, you just have to make the best you can. And that is what I'm doing by doing what I'm doing, that Garry will never be forgotten. He was a human being, a normal human being. He's not a statistic, and he'll never be a statistic as far as I'm concerned.